Hello, everyone. As said, my name is Tencza, and I'm going to be talking about the interview process, specifically the technical interview process, but I'll also touch on some of the other parts of interviewing and the overall interviewing system. And then also want to thank our sponsors for DDD. That without them, we couldn't have the conference, so thank you very much to all of the sponsors. And as you all know, play sponsor bingo, win cool prizes. And I also have a little bingo game of my own. I believe that language is important, and so at any time during this talk, if I use he when I'm talking about a developer, or dude, or guys, please call me out on it. And for every time I do make that mistake, I will make a donation to the Victoria Women's Trust, who does stuff around equality and making sure that people are seen. So feel free to call me out on it. So a little bit about myself, as I said, my name's Ted. I am the founder of Code Purple Consulting. That is just a consulting business that I just recently started because I got redundant at my last job and didn't feel like going through the interview process anymore. So I decided to work for myself. Got over 25 years of experience in doing technical stuff, including interviewing. I've done a whole bunch of setting up or revamping of interview processes for the entire cycle at previous jobs. So I've been heavily invested in trying to get the interview process correct for quite some time now. And I've also spent a lot of time training interviewers, so not just doing interviews, but actually training interviewers. And that's something that, unfortunately, not a lot of companies invest in, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it is a skill, and you really should be training the interviewers. Some of the places that I've worked previously where I've set up these training processes are a company called Prospa, Finder in Sydney, BigCommerce, and a small company you may have heard of, Atlassian. And I set up their interviewing process there. So what are the problems with the technical interviewing? First, you have some common problems, including this clicker not being very good. You've got gatekeeping. What is gatekeeping? Gatekeeping is basically using irrelevant criteria to keep access and control access to the opportunities. Some things that flavors of gatekeeping include things like, having a degree and saying, in your job ad that a degree is required. Every job I've had in Australia has had computer science, bachelor required, master's preferred. And I'll let you in on a secret, I've never taken a computer science course in my life. Not once. I have a master's, but it's in history. So, it's that gatekeeping that prevents people from applying or, feeling like they can belong. Looking at prior companies, where you over-index for, big name companies. And, even at places like Google or Atlassian, you have bad developers in there. So if you're over-indexing for those kind of things, you might end up with some bad developers. Like I said, I've had over a 25-year career. Of that, 4.5 was spent at Atlassian, and I've been trading off that ever since. It's a great thing to have in your bucket, but again, it's really something you shouldn't be that focused on. By the same token, if somebody's only ever worked at sort of smaller companies, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad developer. Time at prior companies, and this works both ways, where you look at somebody looks at a CV and sees that, this person has moved every year or every 18 months, and you don't know why they're doing that. It may be short-term contracts, it may be the economy, whatever. But then you all of a sudden say, nope, I'm not even going to interview them because of that. On the reverse side, you've got some people that will say, they've been at that company for 10 years, 12 years. They're set in their ways. They can't learn new things, so let's not bother interviewing them. And it's completely irrelevant. You don't know why. And having that as a gatekeeping is just cutting out a good portion of the talent pool you could be looking at. Of course, there's also bias. You have a lot of times where you sit there and say, okay, well, I like this person because they have the same favorite sports team, or there's somebody I'd like to go have a beer with, or something like that. And you're not actually interviewing and making a decision based on their qualifications, but rather on your own biases. And so it's really important to be careful with those. Sometimes the interviewers have what I call "thou shalt not pass" syndrome, where they believe that they're the absolute gatekeepers, and their default position is absolutely no, and they've let very few people through. And I've seen this at a lot of companies. It's like 100% of companies believe they have the top 10% in talent. So 100% of developers are in the top 10%, trust me. And that's the way, and so they sit there and they are actually jerks about it. And then you have what I call copy and paste solutions, where somebody goes, okay, Google is a really, really respected thing. They do X for their interviewing process, so we should also do X, which leads to proliferation of how many marbles does it take to fill swimming pools in LA, or ridiculous questions like that that have absolutely no bearing on whether or not this person would make a good software developer. And then you have bad coding tests, which is what I really want to delve into. I have seen some shockers in my time, including giving a few myself back before I sort of wised up. Okay, so why are they bad? First off, one of the main problems with a lot of coding tests is they're either irrelevant or they're useless. They don't really tell you what you need to know to make a good hiring decision. And why are they irrelevant? First, they've got no relation to the task being done. If you're a comparison website and your technical thing is, okay, let me see you reverse a string in place, or something like that, and it just has absolutely no relevance to what the job's going to be doing. Over 25 years, I've never reversed a string in place anywhere but in an interview. They over-index on sort of the CS questions, computer science stuff, and that favors a very specific sort of person, usually somebody who's just graduated, or just taken a refresher course, or likes to read algorithm books on the weekends for fun. But other than that, it doesn't really help you find the right person. You also have to remember that some people, English isn't their first language. And you get questions that are so incredibly complex that as a native English speaker, I'm like, I can't parse this thing. You're given a problem. Okay, you've got 3 nodes, one's a parent, 2 are childs, and now write a script where the third node will relate to the second node for the first node to be able to insert it into the fourth node. And you're like, I speak English and I don't know what you're asking. You've got unclear expectations on both sides. So people coming in, they don't know exactly what they're going to be doing for this test, so they're probably very nervous. And then you have interviewers where they don't really know what passing and failing is. They're just doing sort of a gut feel of what is a pass, what is a fail as they go through the test. You've got a large variability. So when I say you're coming in to do a technical test, it could be any of these. You could be writing code from scratch. You could be doing a code review. You could be finding a bug. You might even be like doing pseudo-code on a whiteboard. It might be a take-home. And again, I don't know about you, but in 25 years, I've never shipped a whiteboard to production. And so I don't understand why they're like that. You get what I call interview lottery, where it depends on the interview you get will make a big difference. Now, there's always going to be some variability between interviewers. People are just different. But when you get extreme interview lotteries, when they sort of focus on completely irrelevant criteria. One of my bosses in the past, who I won't name, used to sit in on technical tests, and if anybody used the mouse, it was an automatic fail. They had to use keyboard shortcuts. If they didn't use keyboard shortcuts, it was a fail. It's like, I don't know about you, but in a year-long project, somebody taking an extra 2 seconds to use a mouse is not what caused the delay, trust me. Style bias, right? When you're sitting there looking at code, some people like to say, I'm just gonna get something working right now, and I'll go through and refactor it. Other people are like, well, I'm gonna sit and think about it and get an optimal solution from the start. Both are acceptable ways to sort of approach problems, but if you have an interview that only likes people that just get it working, then you're gonna end up like eliminating half of your talent pool for no reason. And then, when you're sitting there asking sort of syntax bingo questions, I don't know about you, but I still look up all kinds of syntax and everything. And when you're under pressure, trying to remember the exact form for a Java main clause, and you're like, oh, is it public void or is it string or that? And it's just, you can, just look on Google. And then you have problems with, if you have multiple solutions to a test, but your interviewers haven't synced on what the acceptable solutions are. So, for instance, at a previous company, we had a take-home code review, and it could be solved either by just, it was a really, really bad code review. You could just dump the entire code and write, a 2-line method that would actually have solved the problem. Or you could go through and explain why everything on this particular code review was wrong. Both are acceptable ways, but if you got the wrong interviewer, half of them only accepted the one, the other half only accepted the other, and if you got your signals crossed, you didn't get the job because interview lottery. What are some other issues besides just badly formed coding tests? First off, you have people with poor interviewing skills. There's this assumption, okay, I've been a software developer for 5 years, I'm now an expert interviewer. It's not the way it works. Interviewing is actually a skill. You have to develop it. You really should be trained on it. And just assuming that someone knows how to do that, it's the same problem we have with engineering leadership, where once you're a senior developer, okay, you know how to code, here, manage this team, and acting like it's not a completely different skill. And then also, even if they are maybe a decent interviewer, if they don't have the ability to understand how to properly evaluate a candidate, then you're going to have problems. And that comes with really sort of understanding what the expectations are, having a shared understanding, and I'll go through a lot of this later, shared understanding of what is correct, what is unacceptable, and everything. And so you want to make sure that you've trained your people not just how to do the interviews, but also how to evaluate the candidates in a fair manner. You can overwhelm the candidate with interviewers. I've almost not exaggerating, but I've been on interviews where I'm the candidate and that's the interview pool. That's the panel. It's like, I was in one where it's like literally 7 interviewers on that. And so you're just sitting there and it's intimidating and it's not very effective. You also have the problem of overwhelming the interviewer with candidates. When you find somebody who's actually really good at interviewing and does it well and is a really good ambassador for business, the P&C team tends to always schedule that developer for interviews, and now they can never get their work done. So they get burnt out and they get, maybe even bad performance reviews because the number of things that they've pushed to production has dropped dramatically because they're spending 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week in interviews, especially if you're in a company that's growing fast. You also have, with this bad interview process, you end up with candidate impact. So there's something called sort of asymmetry value, and that is where the amount of value a candidate gets for it is minuscule in comparison to the amount of effort that they have to put into it. And so if you open up and the very first thing you do when a candidate applies is send them a 4-hour long take-home test to do, they're not going to want to spend, really good candidates aren't going to want to spend 4 hours doing your test when they have absolutely nothing vested into the process. Now, if you're Google, maybe you can get away with this, but it's a very rare company that you can have that much value asymmetry. So look at your interview process and make sure that you're providing value for the candidate before you're asking them to do the effort. That value asymmetry should be effort on your part as the company that's hiring, not on the candidate. Because quite frankly, skilled candidates will have other options and they'll just go somewhere else. Okay, so what are some possible solutions to this problem? Here's some that in doing research for this talk, here's some of the ones I've come across. You can have where people just say, don't do coding tests at all. Just don't do it. Just assume people know how to code if they're in a current software development role. You can have, somebody just doing like, send me your private GitHub and I'll look through it and see what you've written and how well your code is. You can have sort of the prepackaged ones like HackerRank, and there's a lot of them out there where you can just have the candidate do that, and they come up with the questions, and they do the scoring, and they just send you a report. You can do take-home projects where you give the person an assignment and then expect them to sort of just put it onto a public repo or mail it to you or however you want to get it back, and then you evaluate. And then you have sometimes day contracts are longer. So here's what I think some of the problems with all of these solutions are. First off is it's a lack of data to make your hiring decision. If you're scrapping the coding test altogether, you're really losing a lot of information that can help you make a better decision. Second, most of those things are very exclusionary. People that have private GitHubs or can spend 4 hours on a weekend doing a take-home test are usually a very specific cohort of people. My weekends are driving my kids to sport or to drama class or to that. I don't have time for personal GitHub repos. I have other interests in my life. Again, you end up with value asymmetry where you're asking them to do the work rather than you doing it. And finally, the answers very well may be available online for some of these things, especially like the HackerRanks and the published ones, so you're not going to know if the person actually did that. Also, a lot of these prepackaged ones do a lot of assumptions without evidence. So it's like, the average median time to fix this problem is 4 minutes, and the candidate took 30, so they're not a good developer. And it's like, well, either that or the kid needed a nappy change or the tradie showed up at the door or whatever. You don't know that. So sitting there just saying, oh, they took long, again, you're eliminating a lot of the cohort, and you're very specifically ending up with sort of a single young person is the one who has this kind of free time, or somebody who doesn't have that sort of responsibilities. And a lot of times they're irrelevant. Like even the take-home tests, they're tests that don't have anything to do with what they're going to be doing in their role, other than maybe just being in the correct language. So what are the keys to a good solution? A lot of it's context. And so I can't tell you exactly how many interviews you should do or what coding tests you should do. It depends on your business. I can, for a price, tell you what so come see me afterwards if that's what you'd like, but I can't do it for the audience as a whole. First off, the most important thing is candidate care. Remember, they're interviewing your company the same way you're interviewing them. And if you come across as a jerk and don't take care of them, they can walk and find another role, especially the good candidates. The ones that you want to hire have other options. You want to be making sure that candidate care is really upfront. Set clear expectations. Don't have trick questions. Set very clear expectations for what you want to do for this test. Don't assume free time. As I said, the free time is a very specific cohort. Don't assume prosperity. Software developers are usually very well paid. We know this, but maybe they've been laid off for 6 months. Maybe they don't have a high-end computer because they had to buy, had to spend the money on the kids' braces or whatever. So don't have a test where they're going to need a super high-end laptop because the one they have is for work and they can't use it for job interviews. Make it relevant. Have it something to do with what they're going to be doing on their day-to-day role. If you don't have any APIs, don't have your coding test be create an API. If you do have a bunch of APIs, then have a coding test that says create an API. Make it iterative. And so constantly look at your test, making sure that it's still relevant, it hasn't gotten out of date, it's giving you the signals that you need in order to hire the best candidate. Make the test very clear. So clear, simple English, making sure that it's easily understood. Focus on the problem solving. That's what we do as software developers. We solve problems. So have the test focus on some sort of way to solve a problem. And help candidates that are stuck, especially if it's in person. Don't sit there and let them just flounder and stare at the screen for 20 minutes without anything. Give them a little nudge. Help them along. And that really goes a long way to sort of, building your own employer brand, because people will realize that you're actually supportive and inclusive. Standardize the experience, making sure that everybody's doing somewhat the same thing. Don't just have random questions all through there. Look at having a bank of questions that your interviewers can use, along with what an acceptable answer is and what an unacceptable answer is. Make sure that it's shared amongst the interviewers. You want to also make sure that you set clear expectations on what is passing. You want to avoid blocking or leading or closed questions. So if you say, okay, when you're setting up a CI/CD pipeline, do you do X first or Y first? Well, maybe they wouldn't have done either one of those. Maybe they'd have done something completely different, but the way you've asked the question, you've blocked their answer. So give them the space to answer the way they want to. Set up realistic conditions. Allow them to use an IDE. Allow them to ask questions. Allow them to use Stack Overflow and Google. We do that every day in our day job. To have it say in the interview you can't do it is just, it makes for a really poor experience. And I would also recommend a candidate briefing package. And what that does is it basically lays out exactly what the tests are, exactly what's going on. It's not going to help them pass it, but it is going to lower their stress levels. Make sure that you have equipment that they can use. If they do need to do some pre-work, make sure that they know about it, but also minimize it. Again, value asymmetry. You want to make sure that you're putting in the effort. And then have a dedicated interviewing. So you want to make sure that you've got training. Train your interviewers on how to interview. At my previous company, we actually set it up to where people had levels. There was junior interviewers, mid-level interviewers, and senior interviewers. And PNC knew not to put 2 junior interviewers on the same thing. And those didn't correlate to what their title was. You could be a senior engineer and a junior interviewer if you've just started it. By the same token, you could be a mid-level engineer and a senior interviewer if you were really good at it. It's a skill. Recognize it as such and treat it as such. Review your feedback that your interviewers are giving. So we always sit there and look at it and make sure that we see if they're saying things like, okay, I've noticed that this person, every time they're interviewing a female candidate, they're writing not technical enough. And then you can say, oh, wait, we've obviously got a problem here. So this person's biased against a certain segment of the population. And also, don't ever accept not technical enough. What does that mean, right? What questions did they fail? What questions did they not understand? Tell me what it is. Don't tell me just not technical enough. And if you follow all those things, you'll get much better candidates coming through and much better results. So thank you, DDD Melbourne.